Hi, my name is Missy Owen, and I'm the clinical director down at our Puzzle Box Academy Palm Bay location. And for this month's parent training, we'll be going over some abduction prevention safety tips and procedures. So this past summer at our Palm Bay location, we ran this program with some of our clients who attended the clinic over the summer. And so this presentation will be going over the rationale behind why we chose this as one of the interventions to teach, the way in which we taught it, the results of that study, and then how at home you as a parent can implement this or do a variation of this with your child to teach them this important safety skill. So one study that I had looked at before starting this abduction prevention program was the NISMART 2. And that is a nationwide study that was conducted in the United States that had found on average 58,200 children are abducted by non-family members every year. It should be noted, though, that the rates of the family member abductions are higher than those non-family member abductions. But for the purposes of the study and what this presentation is focusing on is those non-family members versus the family members. And research has also shown that children who have these abduction prevention skills are more likely to avoid other forms of abuse, such as physical, emotional, sexual, just because they are more aware of potential lures and their rights and dignities and what they should and what is allowed and versus not allowed. And another thing that research has shown is that when an abductor uses various lures, so it could be coming from a place of authority, offering some incentive, like a preferred toy, an edible, an electronic game, a puppy, or asking for help with something, that it's harder for children, not just our clients, but all children in general, to follow those appropriate abduction prevention skills that they've been taught versus that obvious stranger approaching them and saying, like, hey, come with me. So with this study, what we focused on was those lures, as well as that obvious come with me simple request, just to kind of compare the two and see if there was a difference. And it also should be noted that approximately 50% of all children diagnosed with autism have a history or currently display behaviors of elopement or wandering away from their current area. Which, that being said, if a child elopes or wanders away from their area, that just puts them at that higher risk of being abducted because they're not where they're supposed to be. Parents might not be around, or a guardian, whoever's watching them, which just increases the risk of being abducted. So some of the main goals of this study that we did over the summer with our kiddos was to teach them how to recognize those various abduction lures. So with this, we focused on 4 different lures over the summer. First one being just that simple request. The known person would approach the child and say, hey, come with me. The second one we did was an authoritative lure. So with that, the known person would approach the child and say something along the lines of, hey, your mom asked me to come and pick you up. She got stuck at work. Come on, let's go. I'll drop you off to her. A third one was the assistance lure. And so with that, the person would say something such as, hey, my arm really hurts. I have this heavy box in my trunk. Can you please help me carry it out to the playground? The last one was an incentive lure. So with that, the known person would approach the child saying something along the lines of, hey, I have the new Nintendo Switch in my back seat. Do you want to come play it with me? So with that, we did use known persons instead of complete strangers for the kiddos. And that was due to the fact that research shows that more likely than not, if there was an abduction, it's by a person who knows the child or the child knows that they've seen before versus a complete stranger abducting just a random child. Those cases are pretty rare. Another goal was to teach our clients the appropriate abduction prevention protocol to follow in the event something like this happened using a 3-step procedure, which we will get into that in future slides. But the main 3-step procedure is that so one approach that the child says no, yells, some form of just telling the person no, that they run, walk away, and lastly that they tell a trusted adult. So with the purpose of this study, the trusted adult present was the therapist, but then like in different situations at home, the trusted person would either be a parent, the babysitter, guardian, whoever the child happens to be with, or if none of those are present, a police officer or various other community helper. So we also taught our clients to memorize a trusted persons list. So this is something that we had created just to kind of add in to teaching our clients about the 3 steps across the lures. So this trusted persons list was created by all of the parents. And so basically anyone on this list meant that the child could go with this person at any point in time. So typically it was the parents, family members, maybe a close friend, neighbor who was very trusted. And so what we did is that we taught our clients to memorize all the names on this list, and taught them that anyone on this list they can go with, that's safe, that's fine, but anyone not on this list, it's not okay to go with unless they have specific parent permission. So with that, obviously being clinic staff, none of us were on anyone's trusted persons list. So that was hard for some of the kids at first to realize that this is a person I see every day, I work with them every day, but if, say for myself example, if I approach one of the kiddos at the park, I'm like, hey, come with me, I have something cool in my car, they still shouldn't go with me because I'm not on that trusted persons list. Another thing we want to see is if the skills that we taught in the clinic setting generalize to those natural community settings. Because something that research within the field of ABA consistently shows is that just because a skill is taught in the clinic setting, client has it here, they got it down, they mastered it, it doesn't guarantee that it generalizes to that natural community setting. So we did do, just for logistic purposes, the majority of the teaching in the clinic setting with our kiddos. And then we would attempt to do weekly community probes out across various locations and settings to see if what we were teaching in the clinic and that the clients showed us they had mastery of actually generalized to those natural settings. And what we also did is that we did those teaching trials in the community settings. So if one of our clients erred on one of the steps, such as they were approached by the known person, they may have said no, but then they just kind of stood there, they didn't walk away, or they didn't tell their therapist what had happened, we would do a teaching trial and remind them, hey, what are the 3 steps? The client would then tell us the 3 steps, and then we'd walk them through it and have them actually go through the process of the 3 steps to practice that skill in that natural setting. Which is something that research within the ABA field has also shown, is that when you do teaching in those natural community settings, it tends to last longer and generalize better when it's actually taught in those community settings versus generalizing from 2 separate settings, the clinic to community. So some of the locations that we used when we ran this program over the summer were some local parks and playgrounds. With that, we tried to do different ones every week. I believe we only repeated a playground once over the course of the summer. We also went to Denny's one week, so we got to work on those appropriate restaurant skills, eating skills, ordering off a menu, as well as ran an abduction prevention probe. We also went to a pet supermarket one time, so the kiddos got to see some animals, interact with them, ran a probe there. And then also at Publix to work on appropriate grocery shopping skills, shopping, creating a list, getting items, paying for the items, getting the change, waiting in line. And we wanted to do that to attempt to distract the kiddos. Because our kids here are smart, and so they pretty quickly realized when we went to a park or a playground what we were doing. So we wanted to kind of distract them by focusing on other things, going to different locations, so that way they didn't think that each time we went on the bus and went to a community outing that the abduction prevention would be ran. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind as well. If you do attempt to do this at home with your kiddo, across different settings, it's a good idea to let the place know what you're doing. So like, let's say if you're going to Publix and you have it set up that your neighbor who's not on the trusted persons list is going to attempt to lure your kid outside with them to their car, you may want to let the manager or something at Publix just know that you're doing that. Because it does look a little sketchy to just have an adult approach a kiddo without the parent present and try to get them to walk away with them. Which we did run into that situation, which is good that, staff is aware and that they're actively trying to help out the kids. But it's definitely helpful for the site to know, so that way it doesn't cause too much trouble with anyone, or in that everyone's on the same page for everything. So with the study we did over the summer, we started by collecting some baseline data. Which baseline data, that is essentially just what skill the kiddo currently has without us actively teaching anything. So during baseline probes, which we only did one just because the summer was only 9 weeks long, so we didn't have much time to do more than that one probe with baseline, because that would have cut into the teaching trials a little bit too much. So during those baseline trials, we didn't prompt the clients, we didn't reinforce anything. We essentially just had that Confederate, also known person, approach the client, use one of the 4 lures, and then took data on did the kiddo do those 3 steps or not, without us teaching them what the steps were. And then the Confederate would walk away after. And with that, so we did use those 4 lures, which I had discussed in a previous slide, but just to go over them again. So we focus on that simple request, like that, hey, let's go, just very basic, come with me. Also that appeal to authority, which that kind of goes into the parent thing, like, hey, I work with your mom, she's stuck at work, she asked me to come pick you up. Or it could be like, hey, I just got off the phone with your mom, she's running late, she just wants me to take you down the street to meet her, and then she'll take you home from there. Also that assistance request, which that kind of appeals to the child's wanting to help others. So it could be, I hurt my arm, can you help me carry this? Or this box is really heavy, you look like a strong kiddo, can you help me lift it out of my car, please? And then lastly, that incentive one. So with most of the kiddos, especially our kids here, we know that their preferences tend to be electronics. So we did focus on different types of electronic activities, such as like an iPad, a Switch, Game Boy, if anyone still uses those, and had the Confederate approach the kiddo and say like, hey, I have the new Nintendo Switch in my car. Do you want to come check it out? I have this cool game to play if you want to help me play it. Just to try to really lure those kids into see if they would follow with that type of lure. So also during those baseline probes, so if the client did start to walk away with that Confederate after they had presented the lure, we'd have them walk no more than 10 steps away, at which point the Confederate, so that known person, would pretend to get a phone call or would make up an excuse, something such as like, oh, sorry, I forgot I had to go meet my friend, I gotta go. It would just kind of walk away from the kiddo. Then the client would turn around, kind of come back to us, or if they didn't, the therapist would walk up at that point, be like, oh, hey, sorry, I just was inputting some data, let's head over to the swings. So not really talking about it, not mentioning what happened, so that way we don't skew the results. And so with this, ideally we would have gotten baseline data across each of the 4 lures, which that was the initial goal, but we quickly realized during the baseline probes, because we tried to do them all in the one outing just due to time, that after the second one, the kids all knew exactly what we were doing, even though we switched up the lure types. We had 2 different persons with us, so to try to switch between them. But the kids are all smart. They're paying attention to what everyone else is doing. They knew what we were doing pretty quickly. So we were only able to get baseline data across 2, if that, of the lures. And then when we got into the actual teaching phases, we could only do 1 lure at a time. Pretty much once we did that first one, we do the teaching. If we did attempt to do a second one, the data on that second one would be skewed because it had just happened across a different lure type. The kiddo was primed for it, they knew what to expect. So we want to have more accurate data to really determine if those skills generalize versus the kiddo just remembering what had happened 10 minutes ago and then doing the right thing this time. So once we were done with the baseline data, we then started into the actual teaching, which, as said previously, the majority happened in our clinic setting. So we started by having the kids learn the 3 steps of the abduction-prevention protocol, which step 1 is that they say no or yell, step 2, they walk, run away, and then step 3 is that they tell a trusted person, who in all cases during the study was the therapist. And with that, we ran over a variety of scenarios across a variety of locations. So pretty much the therapist would ask the kiddo, so if you're at the zoo with mom and dad, and then your friend's mom comes up to you and says like, hey, your friend's in the car with me, do you want to come and see them? Or something like that, what would you do? And then we'd walk them through the steps that they would say no, they would then walk away and tell their parents what happened. We also went over what to do if when they first said no, it wasn't honored. So let's say that the kiddo did tell the adult no, but then the adult kept persisting. It was like, no, but really you need to come with me right now. That at that point, they essentially have to take it to that next level and yell, no loudly, seek help from someone else. At that point, instead of walking away, they would have to run away. And in those cases too, we went over who the trusted person would be across various settings. So we said if like you're on an outing, a school outing, it would be a teacher. If you're on an outing with us, then it'd be your therapist. If you're at the Disney with your aunt and uncle, it would be your aunt and uncle. If you were at the mall and you got lost, then it'd be a security person present. Just to make sure that those skills generalized and that they didn't learn like, okay, I just only tell my therapist or I only tell my parents. And so to teach these skills, we did use various prompting methods. So at first, it was us verbally prompting, so essentially feeding the answer to our clients. That way we know that they effectively learned it, that they were learning the right thing, and then as they were successful across sessions, these prompts were systematically faded to promote independence with the skill. And then at the same time that we were teaching our clients to be able to state those 3 steps in order what they should do, we were also teaching them to memorize the people on their trusted persons list. Pretty much using those same methods. We would start by either having them look at the list, read it off, us verbally prompting them, and then fading those prompts back until we could just ask our clients, like, hey, so tell me who's on your trusted persons list, and they could name all the people on that list. So on this graph, we have the results of the abduction prevention probes that we conducted in the community with our clients. So with these, it is totally independent. So we just want to see, would the clients do what we were teaching them in the clinic setting and what they showed us they knew in the clinic setting in those natural community environments when presenting with those different lures. So as you can see, with client number 5, we did have one 100% probe with the incentive lure. So that indicated that when approached, the known person used that incentive lure with that client. The client then appropriately did the 3 steps of saying no, walking away, and then telling their therapist what had happened. But as you can also see, we only had that 100% across all clients. And then with clients numbers 7 and 11, it doesn't show any data. So with them, it means that they had 0% with all of the probes. Something you also may notice is that there's different percentages across the clients, different lures presented across the clients, which part of that is due to if they had a 0%, it wouldn't show up as anything. But also the way that the sessions were broken up, we had some clients in the AM, some in the PM. So we had those different times, different volunteers present. So there was overall minimal opportunities for us to run this, which we'll go over some of those variables on the next slide. But overall, what this graph does show us is that the kiddos did learn some of the skills. Right around 50 to 67% of the time they got some of the steps, but overall, only that one time did we have one client do all 3 steps appropriately, despite all of these kiddos mastering the skill in the clinic setting, which also lends and supports that research that just what we teach in the clinic setting, it doesn't automatically generalize that natural community setting. So this is just a summary of what we had discussed on the previous slide with the graph. But so the overall results of the abduction prevention program that we ran over the summer is that all the clients showed that they mastered stating those 3 steps of what they should do when approached with one of the lures in the clinic setting. But when we probed that in the community setting, we only had that one kiddo, that one instance, actually do all 3 steps. Also, all but 2 clients mastered naming all the persons on their trusted persons list over the summer. And then the 2 who didn't master that did within the first 2 weeks of the school year. So that being said, you would assume that the clients, if they knew the 3 steps, if they knew everyone on their trusted persons list, that would generalize that community setting. But as stated multiple times previously, that doesn't always happen, which definitely the results of the study support that and show that just because the clients have mastery of this in the clinic setting doesn't mean that they have mastery of it in that natural community setting. So also with that, as I kind of stated previously, the clients did respond better and more appropriately to those abduction prevention lures when it was that parent volunteer acting as the known person versus someone that they see here every day. Because I know when the one time at Pet Supermarket, like I said previously, when we used that teacher, every single client went with her. Even the ones who have been doing really well, that had never gone with the person before, that usually just struggle with that last step of telling a therapist, when it was that teacher we used, who they hadn't seen all summer, so they were excited, every single client attempted to go away with her. which was interesting to see that just how the skill did not generalize, and just the kind of the novelty of that person who we haven't seen in a while that overshadowed all the skills that we had been teaching them. So on this slide, I wanted to go over some of the variables that influence the results, and in most times that impeded the results and gave us those limited opportunities to really probe the abduction prevention skill in that natural community setting. So the main one was that the summer was only 9 weeks long that we had the clinic kids present, with the first week only being 4 days. So on that week, everyone's getting used to their clients getting used to therapists, getting used to the new schedule routine, new programs. We ran some preference assessments. So we didn't do any of the abduction prevention that first week. So really, in total, we had 8 weeks to run this program, with the 1 week being baseline. So at most, that gave us 7 weeks, or those 7 opportunities to do those community outings and those probes, because we did only do 1 community outing per week, just due to logistics and with the travel and all of that. And one of the factors that is, in hindsight, very obvious, but really that I didn't think of too much when designing the study, is that it's Florida during the summer. So it got pretty hot, especially as we got into the later months like July and then that first week of August. So some days it was just too hot to go out to the park or the playground, or if it was raining, we also couldn't go to the park or the playground. So there were some weeks that we had an outing scheduled, but we just couldn't do it due to the weather. Another thing was, due to us using those known persons, we sought out some parent volunteers to come and be those known persons for us. And so based on whether the clients came in the AM or the PM, we did have different volunteers on different days, but some days we just didn't have any volunteers to use as those known persons. So in some instances, myself or the principal Val, vice principal Tracy, we would show up and run one of the probes, which was interesting because the kiddos knew us, and so the kiddos came with us more often than they did with one of the parents. Which, it makes sense because we are better known to the kiddos. They see us every day, versus having one of the other clients' moms show up. The kiddos might not know who that was. So we did try to have the parent interact with their kid and really announce to everyone, like, hey, look, that's so-and-so's mom. So we kind of cued in that, like, oh, this is a known person. It's one of my friend's moms. And then we also had, at the pet supermarket outing, one of the teachers here was there and ran it with us. So overall, on some of the days, if we just didn't have the volunteer present or we couldn't find a known person to use, then unfortunately we couldn't run this program either. Also, it was the summer vacation, so we didn't have all the clients present for all of the weeks that we ran this program, which is understandable. It's summer vacation, people go on trips and vacations, they go and do things. But that did limit the opportunity we had to run these skills across all clients consistently. Another factor was on the bus that we used to transport between the clinic and community settings, there is limited space available. And so to get each client on it with their therapist, and then as well as someone to drive the bus, that did give us limited space. So in some instances, we did have to kind of rotate between kids each week to give them different opportunities. And then we also, the kids who we had in the clinic who didn't participate in the abduction prevention, we still wanted them to have the opportunity to go on these outings with us. So we did have to rotate between kiddos, which also resulted in less opportunities overall to probe these skills in those natural community settings. So some last notes on what we did with the study. So one of the things that we wanted to avoid was the clients then becoming afraid or fearful, distrustful of whoever the known person was for essentially tricking them into that abduction lure, and then have the therapist come over and do the teaching and all of that. So any opportunity that the known person had to reinforce the client for doing something appropriate, we had them give that reinforcement, the form of praise, high five, telling them good job for not coming with me, something along those lines. So that way the client wouldn't see this known person as someone aversive, because very likely they will see them again, and we don't want to cause any anxiety or make them afraid of this person when they don't need to be. And then just in general, something to keep in mind is that a side effect of that abduction training is that children can overgeneralize that and then see any approach by a stranger, even someone just saying hi, like a benign, friendly approach, as something dangerous. Whether that be walking down the street and a neighbor says hi to you, or checking out the line at Publix and the cashier says like, "Oh, hi, what's your name?" We didn't want to make the kids fearful or create anxiety in these types of situations. So that's something that we really kind of drilled into the kiddos, is that not every approach by a stranger is a dangerous one, only if they ask you to come with them. Just someone walking down the street saying hi, that's one thing, but if someone wants you to come with them, ask for help with something, wants your personal information more than your first name, so if they say like, "Hey, you look like a fun person to hang out with, I have a child your age, give me your phone number so that way we can set up a play date," or "I'm trying to get rid of this TV, tell me what your address is and I can drop it off later." So try to get them to recognize that there are good people out there, that there is safe approaches, at the same time making them aware that not everyone's a good person and that there are these unsafe approaches that they do have to be aware of. Something else that we got to do this summer is one of the weeks we had members of the Palm Bay Police Department come into the clinic across both the AM and PM, so the kiddos got to see them. With that, the police officers, they showed the kids their car, they all got to sit in it, some of them got to talk on the loudspeaker walkie thing in the police car, which they liked that. They got to play with the lights and the sirens. They also did a brief presentation for the kiddos, so kind of describing their jobs, that, the kids should not be fearful of them, what to do if they ever see a police officer. And then we also had the police officer ask each kiddo their various personal information, and then we had the police officer write down what they thought the child's answer was. So with that, we had them ask what the child's name was, their address, their parents' names, and their parents' phone number. So in the clinic setting, we've been actively teaching all the kiddos those type of personal information skills, and most of them have either mastered them or are currently working on them near mastery. And what we did find is that the majority of the children, they did get some of the info correct, so they could either probably tell the officer their name, their parents' name, but they didn't get all of the information correct. So that could have been due to the fact that the officers couldn't understand what some of the children were saying, that the child was a bit timid, so they wouldn't answer the officer, that the children were just too happy that it was the police officer present, so they weren't able to answer. But in a lot of the cases, it was that the officers couldn't understand what the child was saying, or they just didn't know that information. So based on this, something that we did start to do is with the kiddos, who us as the therapists, we could understand what the kiddo was saying because we work with them every day, spend 20 to 40 hours a week with them. We know their language, we kind of know how they enunciate things, versus a complete stranger wouldn't know that. So with some of the kiddos, we then started to teach them to either verbally spell out this information or to write it down, just to give them those different means of communicating this important safety information. So this is something important to keep in mind at home with your kiddo when kind of talking about these abduction prevention and making sure that they know their personal info, is that they can state that personal information in a tone of voice and enunciate it clearly so that a random police officer could know, in the event that they got lost or something, what they're saying. And in the event that they couldn't understand, to give them different means of communicating, whether that would be verbally spelling something, writing it down, even using like a cell phone or something to type in an address or a phone number. So on this slide and the next slide, I wanted to discuss some ways how at home as a parent you could take what we did here at the clinic with some of our kids and implement with your kiddo at home. So the first step would be to create that trusted persons list. So you really want to spend some time thinking about this, because the goal is to teach your kiddo that anyone on this list, it's okay to go with at any time, kind of a no questions asked type thing. Anyone not on this list, you cannot go with unless you have that specific parent permission. And once you have this list established, it is ideal to keep it about 6 or under, because just the more names, the more to memorize, it gets confusing. So once you have the people on that list, to then teach your children to memorize this list, and really that anyone on this list, you're safe to go with, you're good. Anyone not on this list, it's not safe to go with, without specific parent permission. So once you have that established, you then want to Work on teaching those 3 steps that your child needs to follow if someone not on the trusted persons list approaches them and attempts to get them to leave with them. So once again, those 3 steps are that say no, yell, run, walk away, and then to tell a trusted person what had happened. With that, emphasize that, hey, it's only for people not on your trusted persons list, even your teacher at school, your dentists, the neighbor who you may talk to every day. If they are not on the trusted persons list, it doesn't matter, you do not go with them, unless you have that specific parent permission. So once your kiddo has this established, they can accurately tell you who's on the list, they can name the steps, give them a variety of scenarios, variety of types of situations across the different lures to make sure that the skills generalize. Then you actually want to try and conduct these probes out in those natural community settings. So with this, definitely can use one of the 4 lure types that we've talked about throughout this presentation. So that's going to be that simple request, the authoritative, the assistance, or the incentive. Or if you think a different lure would be more applicable to your child, to your current environment, to the places you go, you can always use a different one. And just whatever you use, you want it to be the most realistic and functional that could potentially happen. So when you do this, you do want to try and probe in different environments as well. So maybe one time you go to a park, one time you go to a community pool, one time even in your front lawn and have your neighbor walk by. So all these different things to really make sure these skills generalize appropriately. And then once you start into it, if you notice that there's like 1 or 2 lures, let's say the assistance and authoritative one that your child struggles with, but they do really good with that simple request and incentive one, then you want to focus more on the ones that they struggle with, which would be the authoritative and assistance one. So that way you really get the teaching in, go over the various scenarios outside of these teaching situations. And then when they do make mistakes or make errors during those natural community probes, that you jump in and do some teaching right then and there, so that way they learn what the expectations are and what you expect of them. So as stated on the last slide, you want to make sure that you're using a variety of locations, a variety of known persons who are not on the trusted persons list, and different lure types to ensure that your child can really generalize these skills and doesn't learn just with one person or with one environment or across one lure, that it's all of them. To really make sure that they have a well-rounded idea and they grasp the concept of this abduction prevention program. Something else to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that your child knows their basic personal information and can easily state it to others. It's kind of as we had discussed on that personal information slide. You want to make sure that your child knows it, that they can tell it to others, they can state it in voice clear, that they have other means of stating it, of communicating their personal info if they can't verbally state it, but then also that they know who they can and can't give this information to. Like if you're lost and you get approached by a police officer or a security officer, a various community helper, a store employee, yes, it's okay to tell them your parents' name, your name, parents' phone number, so that way you can get into contact with your parents again. But if you're just at the playground and a random kid approaches you or a random adult approaches you and asks for your personal information, you should not tell them more than your first name, if that. So to really make sure that your kiddo knows who they can and can't give this information to. It's also important to teach your child, in the event they do get lost or you get separated, who they should seek help from in various situations. So like if you get separated at Disney, you should find one of the security workers or one of the employees. If you get lost at the mall, who you should look for. If you're out on a bike ride and get separated somehow, who you should seek out help from. Just to make sure that in the event they do get lost, they actively seek someone who can help them give their personal information to, what information they should give, so that way you can get reunited. Okay, so we are wrapping up the end of this parent training now. So there are 3 questions that can easily find the answers to throughout this presentation. So with these questions, an email will be sent out with these questions in it. So you just have to answer the questions, write them down, send it back, and that will count as your parent training participation for this month. So that way we know that you were watching it, attending to it, and know the information presented. So the first question is, what is one type of lure that an abductor may use that you should teach your child to be aware of? Second one is, what is one location that you could teach your child these skills at? And lastly, who should be on your trusted persons list? So yeah, definitely feel free to look back through the presentation, look at the slides, get the answers written down, and get them turned in. So as long as they get turned in within a week of this slideshow being presented, so it gets put out on the 23rd, as long as they get turned back in by the 30th, you get that full credit and it will count towards your monthly parent training. Thank you, and if you have any questions about this, any concerns, if you want to talk about this more, please feel free to reach out. As I said, my name is Missy. I'm the clinical director at the Palm Bay location, and my email is melissao@thepeacefits.com. Thank you. Have a good one.